First off, thank you guys for having me. Before we get started, because there's no seats, if you guys want to pull the benches out, feel free to get comfortable. But if you want to stand, that's fine too. So I moved it down to the weight room so I could feel more comfortable. Because if I was up in a classroom following some of these guys, that wouldn't go well for me. So I appreciate you guys being here, and obviously Vald for giving me a call. The fellow presenters, the people I call when I have questions. Roderick called me 2 weeks ago. Where's Roderick at? Roderick called me like 2 weeks ago, said, hey, would you want to come do this? I'm like, count me in, right? But then I'm sitting there thinking, oh shoot, what did I just sign up for? Right, like the people that are presented are the people that I call. I can't bring nothing new. So I'm not gonna attempt to bring anything new on the counter movement jumps, on the variables. If you guys have questions, we can rap about that a little bit. But I'm probably not the expert in the room on some of that stuff anyway, so I'm not gonna pretend to be. What I'm instead gonna attempt to show you is something that we've been dabbling with just as a staff. We have actually started playing around with this with our players. And Blake made the comment earlier to me, you gotta be well trained in jumping with load before this data actually matters. So keep that in mind as we move forward. But some of the research on this stuff is just super interesting to me. I read a paper 2 years ago that kind of got me going down some of this. I'm like, man, this is really interesting stuff. And I think it pairs well with some of the stuff that everyone's already talked about today. So Daniel Martinez and Dave did a great job this morning talking about ways to use force plates. This is just a way to add to that. It's not to replace any of that stuff. We do all the jumps and we do a few different things which we'll go into. So don't think that this is replacing any of that. This is probably like a cherry on top. As you're getting comfortable with that other stuff, start doing some of this on yourself. And then if you get comfortable with training your athletes with it, then it might become a supplement tool for you. So my story, real quick, what Roger kind of mentioned was, hey, why don't you just start by telling people kind of how you got started with force decks and Vald and some of that. So 2016, I video chat with Dr. Cohen. We had AMTIs when I first got with the Sacramento Kings in 2014. So I've been there now 5 years, going into my 6th season, which in the NBA is basically 30 years worth or so. So we had AMTIs, we had a different software running them, and we actually had a nice little setup. I should have put a picture of what that looked like, but we kind of built, we didn't want to raise the floor and we didn't want to put them into the floor because we were going to move to a new arena. So the solution that we came up with was to build kind of a wooden platform around that had a lot of size to it, with the goal being eventually we might get into some skaters or some sliders off the plates. Before I got to Sacramento Kings, I was with P3. Some of you may know them. They have a full testing battery. So I started to think, well, maybe I'll bring some of that. But to bring some of that, you either have to have a flat floor or build a floor around it. So we had a nice setup. We had HDMIs going to it, and we were kind of playing around with jumps. Little did I know then what I know now, we weren't playing around with anything. We were just messing everything up, but it looked really cool. So I heard about force decks. Someone said, call Dr. Cohen. I did, and the first thing that stuck out to me, which all of you probably already know, is he doesn't try to sell anything. And I'm like, yo, what? You got a product here, man. Like, you got to sell this thing. He's like, nah, it'll sell itself, which it has. So it's kind of like the Apple of the industry, right? It doesn't really sell, or it doesn't really, you guys don't promote it much, but it sells itself because it's just such a robust tool. 2017-18 was our initial year. We had AMTI, so we were kind of one of the first teams trying to integrate the AMTI force decks connection. We troubleshooted some of that. Initial year equals mistakes. So even before we got into training camp, one thing that I wanted to start to try to figure out is the sensitivity, what Dave talked about, right? Reliability is important, and we care about CVs because if you want to know what true change is, you better understand what standard error is. But beyond that, I want to know what's the sensitivity of these measures. So the first thing I thought was, why don't I drive myself into the floor and jump every day and see what changes? So I did that, kind of. I worked up to a 1RM for 21 days straight, and thinking that that would burn me into the floor, but it didn't actually. What you begin to learn is your body's pretty robust, and 1RM training is actually pretty, it's pretty robust in the sense that I was under the expectation that eventually my 80% is going to become my 1RM, and that wasn't the case. It's pretty resilient through 21 days. Tapered off for a week, jumped again at the end of the week. Retrospectively went back and said, something in there's got to be sensitive to change. Something's got to tell me that I'm fatigued. Well, because I made mistakes, I wouldn't know, because Drew, you talked about it earlier. I didn't take the time to do good weigh-ins. So my weigh-ins were shit, so my data was shit. right? So that was a fun 21 days, and I could tell you a cool story, but I can't tell you anything about it because my weigh-ins were just terrible. The weigh-ins were terrible because the force plates that we had, we didn't have FD lights, which we'll get into, which we'll get into in a minute, but we had AMTIs that had levelers on them, but because we were moving to new arenas, I hadn't put the levelers on them yet because we thought we would put them in the floor. So I had AMTI sitting on a floor, and even our weight room now, like if I hold the bumper up and let it go, it kind of moves around. So I got AMTIs on a flat surface that isn't a flat surface, so that messed all the data up. But I had cool toys, and I gotta put them in with the players because that's important. So training camp comes around, and we don't worry about all that. We're just gonna jump guys. Let's start jumping people, no rhyme or reason. Throw arm swing in because who cares? As long as everybody arm swings, that's cool. That's standard, right? So we went with arm swings in 2017-18, our first year with force decks, and isometric mid-thigh pull. I'll show you that setup in a moment. Transitioning over towards the off season and into the new season, so our 2018-19 season that just ended, we had a staff changeover, which worked out pretty nice because it allowed me to bring my assistant strength coach, Anthony Darmiento. Some of you may know, he was with the USOC prior. Really good experience with force plates. And as my role has changed over the past, especially the past season, where prior to this past season, I kind of oversaw strength and conditioning, sports science, and nutrition. We added staff members. The staffs are getting bigger, as Dave and Blake can speak to in the NBA. These staffs are getting bigger and bigger. So we've added a lot of personnel. So a lot of things, is what I was talking to Dr. Cohen at lunch about, a lot of things started to get taken away from me. And that's pretty tough as a practitioner, right? It's like, oh, you're taking my baby, you're taking sports science from me, you're taking workload monitoring and jumping and all of these things. And then you wait a few months and you figure out, oh, now I get to lock in with these players. I get to focus on coaching, I get to focus on programming, and I get to go home at 6 p.m. and not worry about dashboards, and I could just play with my dog if I want. So that's kind of where we're at now, but we still, myself and Anthony, we run all the force plate data. We may get to a point where we can hand the collection off, because to me, while the tool is great for collecting, the money maker is in the analysis, right? And that's what we want to start putting our brains to. So we'll see how we transition that. So last season, 2 seasons ago, we were doing counter movement jumps, isometric mid-thigh pulls. This past year, we dialed in on the CMJs really, really well. The way we were able to do that is force deck lights. So we ended up purchasing force deck lights, and this was budgets. Everyone thinks because you're in the NBA, you don't have a budget. That's not true. You have budgets, and you can't get things as quick as you want. But we ended up getting them after All-Star break. And because of our relationships with the players, they bought in pretty well, and we actually jumped before every single game. And so we travel with the plates, we set them up outside the locker room. Our standardizing of the warm-up is their shooting time. So we don't get fancy at all. Once you go out to your shooting time, as soon as you come back into the locker room, you have to jump. It's 3 jumps, hands on hips. We have a protocol for that. I probably stole that from Matt, wherever Matt's at. So I probably stole that from him. I had the pleasure of going out last summer to visit him and speaking at Everton with him. I don't reinvent the wheel. If someone's doing cool things, I steal it. I'll give you credit, but I'll steal it. And then because we had that system in place, it gave us freedom or flexibility to introduce new things because we weren't chasing CMJs anymore. We were getting that consistently. And because we were getting that consistently, we were able to occasionally take the CMJ out and stick something in. So single leg CMJs, we were able to dabble with that. Squat jumps, long lever isos, those all became part of kind of our experimentation. The squat jumps and the long lever stuff becomes more of like a return to play screening protocol, right? So we start to separate, and Dave, I think you talked about this, separating some of your tests. Are they for screening or are they measurements, neuromuscular readiness measurements? The CMJ is kind of our readiness measure where we want to do that as often as we can, whereas some of these other tests are, hey, we just want to make sure we have them just in case someone gets hurt. We got to come back to that data. Looking forward to this upcoming season, 1920, CMJs are going to be there. We moved away from isometric mid-thigh pull. We didn't do that at all last year, right? So you see that jumps. We're moving towards an isometric belt squat. I'll show you that setup in a moment. Single leg CMJs, a 5'10", squat jumps, long lever iso, and then something like I said, I'm here to steal stuff. Ankle calf stuff, I got to talk to Matt later about some of that, trying to figure out how we fit that in, and then an upper body test, trying to figure out an upper body test. So if someone has a good variation of that, bring it to me. NBA challenges. This is one of the biggest, I think, confounding variables within our data collection and analysis is we deal with NBA athletes, which means that it's really on us to get the buy-in in the things we want. And while I pride myself on being able to do that, that doesn't mean we're perfect, right? There's definitely days where guys are like, I ain't got it for you today. So now you got to make that decision. Do I fight that battle now, or do I play the game with him and say, don't worry about that now, but you owe me one? And so occasionally we have to do some of that. And if you could balance it right, then you can get some data. And if you don't balance it right, then you'll go a whole season with 3 jumps, which probably were trash, and you could look at the CVs that determine some of that, right? So we try to fight some of those challenges. On top of that, the logistics of the NBA. You play 82 games in 6 months. You travel a lot. So things like Dave kind of talked about, some type of protocols around like game day -1 or +1 or +2, or where are we at with some of that? Well, that kind of goes out the window. Now it's like, oh, because every minus day is a +1 and +1's a minus, and you got a game every other day, so you just got to figure it out. Which means that the data always has some limitations. So we do go in and we try to note some of those things. So if you end up jumping, for example, after your workout, well, we go in and we'll leave that note. And that's something that we got to actually try to tease out because the notes aren't exportable. And so someone has a solution for that. So we're always trying to add extra notes in just to provide a little bit of context, because as things change, we don't want to start making some assumptions when the reality may be it just be because you squatted them that day on Tuesday and you didn't do that on Thursday. And now you think they're down, but they're really not down. You just gave them some acute fatigue you thought you didn't think about. So there's just some inherent challenges, but you know, find an excuse or find a way is kind of what I tell our guys. So for us, we just try to get it done, knowing that there's limitations, which means before we jump to conclusions, we better have a discussion about it, right? And that's why I asked you that question, David. I love your approach. I wrote that down, which is before you start worrying about doing X, Y, and Z intervention, the first thing you better do is retest them within 24 hours or so to make sure that data might have changed on its own with time. Let's see if I can get this to play. Well, on the right side you see is our isometric belt squat setup. Someone in here is probably thinking, why don't you just do a isometric mid-thigh pull? We played around with that. One issue that we saw pretty early is just the efforts, whether it was conscious or subconsciously, the efforts just weren't there. The isometric mid-thigh pull peak forces that we were getting, we just weren't happy with. We knew that there was more in the system. And in this video, I'm screaming at guys, like you can try to cue them out of it, and maybe it was buy-in. So we thought, okay, well, what's one way around that? We can either go this direction and say strap them up and tape them down and train them and do more pulls in the training and try to clean up the data for data's sake, or we can just try to find a way around it that allow them to give us good output. So this is just a belt squat platform right here, and we had just a local company build that out for us. There's an anchor point in the middle, and then the belt is there. We don't really use hand support. Like we played around with hand support. The problem with that is because you are trying to push through the floor as hard as you can, you end up pulling on the bars and then pulling forward, and so stability becomes an issue. So we've done this already with about half the team as part of an exit screen, and it was really good. The numbers were pretty high. The question we always get is, well, what is the peak force in isometric mid-thigh pull compared to your belt squat? Most of our guys are somewhere between 6,000 and 7,000 newtons with the belt squat, and none of them are even near that with the isometric mid-thigh pull. Now that's probably just because of the levers, right? So that's not a good or bad thing, but it does help us clean it up. The video that you can't see is the other setup that we played around with, which is just putting a trap bar right under here and having guys rip up. The video there is somebody picking up the entire rack. So that happens, and then I went out and bought the sawtooth attachment that I also stole from Matt, which is a cool attachment that Sornex makes, thinking we were going to play around with that, and we went in this direction instead. So those are just some changes. As far as the testing goes and why we do what we do, most of you are probably familiar with the literature. You wouldn't have bought force plates anyways, right? So I'm preaching to the choir here. The relationship between dynamic strength and sport performance with the isometric mid-thigh pull and all of the various tasks on the right side. That's from a recent Paul Comfort paper. Change of direction stuff. And this is a question we always get. Well, what kind of change of direction testing do you do? We don't do any. We do some of it as part of our draft process. But once guys get to us in season, it's really hard for me to go and say, hey, I need a 5'10" right now, or 5'10" drill from you right now. We don't even have a Fusion Smart Speed to time it, so we got hand timers so that, you know, there's protocols around that. So instead of trying to figure out a test that works, I said, well, does counter movement jump work? Does something we're already doing work, right? And it looks like it does. Now, this ain't my opinion. This is just in the literature. This is another recent paper. But these relationships between your CMJs, they did a zigzag test and they did a t-test, and you'll see that the relationships are pretty good. They're good enough for me to say, I like the test, that's the test I'm going to use. Quote there that essentially justifies why we do that and not change the direction. Ballistic performance. So this is kind of, I think, getting in the meat and potatoes of what we want to do today. We know that ballistic performance is critical for basketball, but most sports in general, right? Ballistic performance, jumping, can be defined as the ability to accelerate body mass both as much as possible within the shortest amount of time. Again, preaching the choir. From a mechanical point of view, ballistic push-off performance is directly related to net mechanical impulse produced on the ground. So we'll use jump height today, and we'll use impulse momentum to get that. Ballistic performance is dependent on both max power output relative to body mass, the lower limbs can develop, and highlighted part there, the force velocity mechanical profile. I think I have something in here that shows, yep, right there, perfect. Force velocity profile. So we've all heard the term. If you're a strength coach, you understand the concept. You see the cool graphs, and you see like you got to train at these speeds to do this quality, and like we all, I think, understand some of that fundamentally. When I think of it, I think of the three contexts. So globally, does the athlete have enough force and velocity capacity? Are they strong enough? Are they fast enough? That can be answered in a million different ways, right? And we all kind of put our own brains around, are they strong enough? What's strong enough? That's a big debate in our industry. I'm not here to answer that, but I think in general, when you start to think about your athlete, you want to answer the question, is he strong enough? And if not, let's get him some more force, right? Some more strength. Is he fast enough? If not, he's going to need some more velocity training. And then the example there, dynamic strength index. So we hear nice, cool thresholds of like 0.8, right? It makes sense. Let's get everyone to 0.8. But what does that actually mean? And I think, Daniel, you mentioned it earlier. You can have a 0.8 and you could be nice and pretty in a dynamic strength index, but if you don't produce any force, you're still a shit athlete, right? So, and that's more going to be demonstrated later when we get into the force velocity profiling. Even if you have an optimal profile, that doesn't mean you're a good athlete. It just means you have one box that's ticked that may allow you to train better to become a better athlete. CMJ force time plots. Drew, you talked about this. You showed something. Daniel, you showed one, and John McMahon has a few. I think you showed one of the force time plot curves. I should have posted one. But it's a really cool output to me because it makes you look really cool from a sports science perspective. It just plots your force and your time over a graph. But the issue there is now you got to like compare within trial to understand change, and then you really just still don't know what optimal is. So what we'll do today is a vertical jump, and you could also do it with horizontal sprinting, but we'll do vertical jumping. And it's just going to compare the force velocity profile created or developed by Drew today compared to what he should be able to do based on his stature. Each perspective provides value and provides an answer to a specific question, right? I'm not here to tell you do this or don't do this. Ask the questions, find the answers, and that's why force plates are so important, right? They just allow you to ask better questions. And if you come to conferences like this, or you get to a position where you can go fly around and figure out and learn from the best, it just allows you to ask more questions, which for me is very important because in the NBA, it's tough to know answers because you have so many confounds, right? So for every time someone comes to me and says, yeah, I'm going to predict injury, I'm like, I don't know how you plan to do that because we got 82 games and I don't even know where these guys are at 2 a.m. right now. So there's just a lot of things that are going on. Force plates allow us to ask more or better questions. Requires context. When I think of with my player specifically, I always think of questions like this. Are you strong enough to guard your position? Are you fast enough to guard your position? And do you have an optimal balance of these qualities? To me, that's important because it's always tactical and technically relevant or context specific for each individual, right? So you can have a point guard that appears to be kind of weak or relatively weak based on whatever threshold you come up with. Trap bar deadlift, he can't trap bar deadlift 2 times his body weight. He's a weak athlete. Okay. But can he guard his position? Can he blow by the people he needs to blow by, right? Is he strong enough to do what he needs to do for himself or within the context of the coaching environment? So I think of a player that we've had, he's been weak, labeled as weak for multiple years, and he was always a big case for us. Once we transitioned our playing style, his weakness was no longer a weakness, right? Because the things that we were asking him to do, we were no longer asking him to do those things. And in fact, his weakness, which came from his leanness, he was a pretty small guy, probably helped him as we changed tactics because then we became a really fast team, right? And so for me as a strength coach, I'm like, man, that's nice. I don't got to worry about that no more, right? That's easy. But I think those things are always relevant when you start to ask yourself these questions. Last few things before we get into this with Drew. An optimal force velocity profile exists for each individual that maximizes the ballistic performance and represents the optimal balance between force and velocity qualities. Again, optimal exists, and that's just from the literature based on stature and computations. Some of you may know this literature. San Mazzino specifically for that. The optimal force velocity profile can be computed using previously proposed equations, and then relative difference between your actual and your optimal just becomes your deficit, right? And once you understand the deficit, well, now we can tailor our training programs towards creating a more optimal force velocity profile. Force velocity profile allow us as practitioners to detect force or velocity deficits, and then we'll quantify a limb imbalance. We're going to do so today with loaded jumps. Boom, there we go. I'm going to use an Excel in here a little bit. It's in the resources listed here. It's JB Marin on his blog. Has anyone seen that stuff? Am I preaching the choir for some of you guys? Good. And I figured that would be the case. What I want to do today is just actually do this, because I think a lot of times we go to workshops and we learn really cool stuff, and then we sit there and we're like, man, it's really cool. I'm going to go back and look at that. And then you go back and sometimes you go back and look at it, sometimes you don't. And then when you do, sometimes it just becomes really tough to understand. So my goal is just to do it, show you how easy it is, and then talk about some of the applications of that. So Drew, we're going to set you up on this force plate. And we're going to get this going. Instead of having him jump 8 times or more, we're going to probably just jump 3 times, and we'll deal with the consequences of that. So first thing you're going to do, before you even weigh them in, all you need for this stuff, these 2 things, tape measure and a goniometer. So we're going to measure push-off distance and lower limb length. Lower limb length is just measured from basically the hip to toe off. Drew, I'm going to have you actually lay down. So all you have the athlete do, lay down, point your toe as if you're jumping. And then you just measure. It's not very complicated. Toe out, toe out. I'll go with 52 inches. Does anyone have a piece of paper on them? Would you mind just writing that down, 52 inches? That's probably going to be easier. And the starting position, this one I might actually need some help. Yep, so there's some debates on where you should start somebody. What I tell people is get into your squat jump position, boom, and then we can go in and actually measure what this kind of looks like, right? Now, the debate exists, and that's actually pretty good. It's at 100, and I'll say, are you comfortable there? Yeah. So instead of trying to get him to 90, I would say that's cool. We're going to leave him at 100, because that's where he's going to feel most natural jumping from. And if I'm going to load you, you could relax. If I'm going to load you, I probably want you to be more comfortable than worrying about getting you to 90, right? As long as you're consistent with the measurements, which won't change, and the positioning, which the way we like to do it is, once he's at where he was just at, about 100 degrees knee flexion, we'll just take a PVC pipe, set it right next to him, find his hip, and put his initials on the PVC pipe, right? You could do it multiple ways. You could have them set up with a trap bar on blocks, on DC blocks, and we know how many blocks he has to use. But as long as you know their starting height and that stays the same, then you're good. So let's do that again. Get back in your position. We said about 110, and then we're just going to measure, same thing, hip to, and the only thing you want to do, and that's just going to be to the floor, is just make sure that these angles don't change much as he's going through here. 35? 35. Yep, 35. And you guys will get this Excel, and after this, it should run pretty quick. Drew, would you mind just setting up those force plates while I log this in? Yeah. All right, we got Drew. We'll get his body mass from the plates. His lower limb length was, what do we say, 51 inches? 52. And his initial height, which was where he was just at, was 36? 35. Boom. So his push-off distance, 17 inches. And then what we got to do, you got to convert everything because, you know, everything's in meters. We said 51 or 52? 52 inches is 0.52 meters. 35. 0.52 and 0.35.
It's right there.
0.52 and 0.35. 0.17 meters. And today we're just going to do 3 jumps, 4 jumps. So first one you're going to do is no weight.
Yeah.
So now you're just doing jumps. Now the literature will tell you you want to get up to 5 jumps, you want to do it 3 times, you want to take the best trial. Practitioner tells me I want to get at least 2 trials, ideally at 4 weights, but if it's got to be 3, it's got to be 3. And the equations that you can find in the literature actually suggest that once you have 2, the regression model doesn't change much, so you could probably live with that. But today we'll do maybe just 2 or 3 of them. First thing you're going to do is start on the plates. We're just going to do a squat jump. Did you zero these already?
Yeah, that's something. Probably zero them again.
They go there. Weight athlete. Gonna take that. All right, so just squat jump. Get set. On you. Nice, we'll do 2. Nice. And we'll just export the data after. 100 kilos, I'll plug you in at. Cool. And so we'll do a few of them, and then we'll go back and export it and get the heights for everything. So first one's there. Next, we want to get about 20 kilos. Let's grab the trap bar, make it easy. Yeah.
This is, I think it's like 40 kilos.
Even better. Same thing. Get set. On you. Nice. On you. Nice. And then we're just going to take the best of each trial. We can make this the last trial. How you feeling, Drew? You feeling good? Are there any questions so far? Some of this, has anyone done this before? A full force velocity profile? Couple guys? Cool. You can give them 2 minutes, or you can say, it's just for show purposes anyways. Yep. Same thing. Position. On you. Good. Yep. Boom, boom, boom. I like it. I think that's it. You guys get the point? Or do we want to see Drew jump again?
Yes.
Well, there it is. And then for standardizing height, the easiest way to do it is DC blocks, in my opinion. So once you set the blocks, especially if you have just 1 or 2 guys in town, it makes it real easy. If there's a lot of people coming in, then you better have your PVC pipe and some interns loading DC blocks. But once they're set, you know, right now, Drew's almost got to be real tense in that position to maintain. Obviously, he's fighting gravity a little bit with the weight. But if they're on the blocks, it's easier to hold that position, and then he could just go. All right, last one, last one. Two-minute break.
Just remind you of the NBA?
A little bit, a little bit. I think you're jumping a little higher though.
Yeah.
You're not supposed to rack your own weights if you're in the NBA.
True veteran. Yep, go ahead and step on.
Oh, this feels good.
All right, last two, Drew. Here we go, lock it in, come on. Get up, come on. Nice. You're there. Get up there. Nice. And the last note on the collection process is, again, literature might tell you that by your last attempt, your jump height should be around 10 inches or less. If it's higher, then you probably should repeat or keep going. Again, now we're getting into the practitioner versus the researcher, right? If one of my guys hits a 12-inch jump, I'm not going to go back and tell him, yo, we got to add a little more weight, unless he's feeling good. But because the regression model doesn't necessarily get any better, at that point we're just playing with time and effort and pissing somebody off, as Blake could probably attribute to. So that's it. We just collected all that. Now the only things we got to do, like I said, you guys are going to have the Excel. This is from J.B. Morin's lab or from his blog. I didn't reinvent the wheel at all, but the study that I'm going to talk about after this is what really impresses me about some of this stuff.
Question on loading.
Yeah.
How did you get to the different load increments?
Yeah. Good question. Ideally, you would jump probably about 20 kilos and get about 5 efforts in. So we might go, but then now we're just getting to the practitioner side, right? Like, is it really that important? The numbers aren't, I don't think the numbers are that important as long as they're evenly spaced trials, right? So like on mine, what I have is 0, which is just body mass, and then 20, 40, 60, 80 kilos. So if we had all the time in the day today, we probably would have done that. And then if you're a heavier guy, you probably want to just take that up a little bit higher.
Yeah, that would be my question. So is it irrespective of the mass of the athlete? So if I have, you know, a 250-pound male,
Yeah.
120-pound female.
Yeah. Well, technically it is irrespective of their mass. It's going to be relevant or relative, to the jump heights that they're achieving. Because all you need is evenly spaced heights so that your model comes out really well. And I'll try to actually have it loaded up here. You'll see what that looks like on the force time curve as it's plotted. So if somebody weighs 300 pounds, but they can only jump 180 pounds, or they can only jump 60 kilos, for example, at 10 inches, well, you're kind of stuck, right? Because at some point they have to leave the ground and come back down. So I think it's relative to the height that they can produce, which is obviously going to be a little bit related to their mass. All right, now we'll load it. Actually, Drew, would you mind helping me with this?
Yeah.
Just so we can show them this.
Yeah, because we got the spreadsheet here as well.
Oh yeah, let's transfer it so they can see it.
And then, what are you gonna pull? Jump.
Jump and mass.
So let's go.
Jump height. All we need is jump height and total mass.
So we want let's see if we can do this real quick. Because you want the average of each, yeah?
Mm-hmm. No, just the peak height for each try. And we'll just take the best one.
All right, let's do this.
But it's going to be in meters, so I'm just going to transition it. So once you tell it to me in centimeters.
Oh shit, you want it in centimeters.
Or inches. Inches is fine.
What the fuck just happened? Whatever. Jump height, which flight time? Impulse momentum. So we got 38.9.
38.9.
34.1.
34.1.
26.9.
Hold on, let me actually pull it up right. 26.1 was that last one?
26.9.
26.9.
And 22.5.
22.5.
And then you want the masses for each?
Yeah, and then I'll plug that in. Actually, let's put that on your sheet, but here, I'll take it from you. So the first one should have been 100.
Yeah, it should have been 100. Let's do this. So 100.9.
There it is.
Yeah.
So 100, 126.
0.3.
0.3.
And 149.5.
149.5.
167.5.
167.5. All right, cool. And then I'll just read those back into that sheet, and
there you go. Okay, is this one you wanted? Total. Is that this?
Yep. So your first one?
Hold on, where am I entering?
Sorry. So right here, it's a total mass. This is 100. That was your first body weight. All right. And then your height, I'll give you that, was 0.389. Yep. Next,
For
mass. Yep. 126.3. Oh, you got nothing going there. 126.3. Yep. And then height was 0.341. Yep. Next mass was 149.5. Yep. Next height was 0.269. Yep. And then 167.5. And then 0.225. And then we're gonna go back up here. Thanks for jumping, by the way.
Yeah.
100 kilos there. We said this was 0.52. And we said this was 0.35.
Well, those were inches, yeah?
I converted them.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, no.
Boom.
Boom, there we go. Alrighty, so you guys kind of see, we just plugged that in real time. Yeah, he's a stud for that one. So additional mass, so again, if I was you guys, I would just go download this and it'll be linked in the resources that I'll send over. So total mass here, give me a second here. There we go. Total mass for his first jump unloaded, 100 kilos, right? And then we just loaded it, 126 kilos, 149 kilos, 167, going down that additional mass. So the total mass there was obviously body weight plus the additional mass, and that's the height that he achieved. We just took the best trial of those two. Up here, we plugged in that lower limb length that we took laying down. We took that initial height, which was him standing in his squat jump. And then his push-off distance is just the difference of those, right? And mechanically speaking, that's just the work potential that he has. That becomes really relevant when you start to compare athletes of different height, and we get it all the time. You know, front office wants to know, well, how does this guy's power compare to this guy's power? Well, slow down, because the work potential is massively different, right? So that becomes a real relevant conversation, and those are debates out there in the literature, and you guys are having those discussions. But displacement just becomes extremely important, because displacement is going to tell you where you can go from a velocity perspective, right? If I'm just a short guy, which I am, and I have nowhere to go, I might not be able to reach negative velocities as well, right? Compared to just a taller guy. So those are just things to consider. I think it's just highlighting the fact that push-off distance is going to tell us a lot about their force velocity profile potential. So here we go. This is the regression model that I talked about up top. You'll see his isn't very good because this right here.
So the masses need to be changed. Yeah, we entered in the total. Yeah. Session 26.
Yep.
Yeah. Good job. It made me look good.
You're not that big.
I was like 280.
Squared away, squared away. Right, additional mass, correct. Total mass, good. Height, we got. Boom, boom, boom. And then force velocity profile. So here we probably would have, you'll see the R squared value shot up, right, 0.87. So it's a little bit better now. If we were to do a few more trials and actually level out the distance that he's pushing from, so give him the DC blocks, that number should shoot up to about 0.95 or even better. And that's when you'll start to see a nice straight line relationship here. But according to this, Drew has a actually pretty optimal force velocity profile, right? So he's about 1% off from optimal, right? No surprise there. But again, context is important. Having an optimal force velocity profile does not necessarily mean you can jump that high. All it tells you is that the relationship between his force characteristics or qualities and his velocity qualities are good, right? That's important because now what we can give Drew is a well-balanced training program rather than focusing on one end of the spectrum, right? And so now what this just did is it took away the guessing time for me. I don't have to say, does Drew need more force? Does he need more velocity? Well, when I'm starting to speak about ballistic performance, vertical ballistic performance, or jumping, he actually has an ideal force velocity profile. So now all I got to worry about is making him a better total athlete, raising both ends of that spectrum and making him jump higher. All right, does that make sense? It should, because it's, again, preaching to the choir, but I think it's important because it allows us to stop the guessing a little bit, right? And I think everyone that's presenting today is kind of hinting at we could stop the guessing. That's what Danielle talked about. That's what Dave's going to talked about. That's what Matt will talk about, Cohen will talk about. All of these things are allowing us to stop guessing and start locking in on our training prescriptions or our rehab protocols or our readiness interventions, those types of things. So if I take it back to the PowerPoint and finish up with what I think is more important or more relevant, training effects, right? So cool, Ramsey, you just did that. You know he's ideal or he's optimal. When I do mine, I'm a velocity deficit guy, and someone in here is probably a force deficit guy, right? The one caveat there is just because you don't look like you train or you do, that doesn't necessarily mean it's going to tell you what you need, right? So we don't have to go to the assumption that, well, you don't look like you train and therefore you need more force, right? Or you look like you're fast and I can see it on the court and therefore you're not velocity deficit. All of those things can be there relative to the mechanics involved for the athlete, right? So you can start doing these things and start really dialing in what does this athlete need. This is the paper that got me really locked into some of this. Raise your hand if you've read this paper before. It's him and his radio paper. Ooh, that's no surprise. That's no surprise either. The presenters can't raise their hands. I love this paper. Like the whole thing is highlighted. I think they wrote it really well. They write it to a practitioner level. And it really got me to buy into like, yo, I could stop guessing. I could start getting things right a little bit. So what they did, they determined the force velocity profile just like we did, except they used a Smith machine with a ball on the back, right? Everything else was basically the same. They did 4 to 5 trials, and they had more time to recover, et cetera, but point being, same thing. They categorized the subjects, right? So categorized by their imbalance. Were you force deficit? Were you velocity deficit? Were you well balanced? So Drew would have got this program right here in the middle. Real simple program in this paper, but the thought remains the same. If you're well balanced, let's give you a well balanced program. What does that look like? Get a little bit of strength, little strength power, a little power, speed, a little speed. Work along the continuum, right? Okay, great. If you're force deficit, you know what you probably don't need? Too much speed work, because you're good on that end, right? So you're not getting speed work here. Flip it the other way, right? If you need speed, you have enough force, you need speed, come down this way. These are the programs you're going to get. This was 9 weeks of training, just like that, and this was the actual program. Real straightforward. If you needed strength, you were back squatting, leg press, deadlifting. If you needed speed, you were doing max roller push-offs, which I'll show you in a minute, and then you were doing CMJs. Again, real easy, not reinventing the wheel, but I think it's really cool from a coaching perspective. I could lock in with some of this. Another big part of this paper that I love, you rarely get this in the literature, I don't know why. They rarely report individual responses, right? That's a huge issue. I don't care what the group mean did. Because when you group mean 10 different people with 10 different responses, it's going to look like one response, and I can't really use that with my athlete. I was having a conversation at lunch just a moment ago, and we started to talk about, I got one guy in front of me. I got to know how this affects that one guy. In optimized groups, again, force deficit, velocity deficit, or well balanced. You got a program that was tailored to your force velocity curve. These were your responses. Everybody but one improved their force velocity imbalance, and every single person improved their jump height. That's pretty impressive, right? In the non-optimized group, they had another group where they took their force velocity profile, and if you were force deficit, you didn't get a force deficit program, right? You just got a random program. which is actually what occurs in team setting, right? That's exactly what I'm even guilty of, right? Hey, I got 10 NBA athletes coming in. Oh, shoot, we better figure this out. And everyone's going to start to do the same thing. Well, clearly that's not the best approach, because when you do that, about half the group is going to get results and about half isn't, right? So if we can start to tailor these programs to the very specific needs of the athletes, that's pretty impressive. And that's what this graph shows here, with basically zero change across in jump height for the non-optimized group. That's the group that didn't get a program tailored to their force velocity profile. Training effects and optimizing individualized training programs specifically addressing the force velocity imbalances is more efficient at improving jumping performance than a traditional resistance training common to all subjects. Again, this is relevant because regardless of how strong or powerful you are, a well-balanced force velocity curve is going to allow you to improve ballistic performance independent of strength, right? Does that make sense? So as long as we create a force velocity profile that's well-balanced, you can become a better athlete alone. Now, that doesn't mean you're going to become a great athlete. You still need to train. I'm not saying that, but it gives you better training potential. Horizontal push-off. I saw this exercise for the first time in that 2017 paper. 2019 paper just came out. This San Mazzino paper, 2018, excuse me. Really cool concept. Basically a shuttle, right? We all know what a shuttle is, or like a ballistic leg press type machine. But they use a sled, or excuse me, a dolly. And the video won't play, but I'll show you the picture. Oh, I lied, it will play. So this is from the paper. And if you read the Jimenez-Reyes paper, they do a good job of explaining why that is not the same as assisted jumping, right? Because we've changed gravity effect on you, right? So that's not the same. And that's relevant because I have triphasic bars and I've used assisted jumping before. But now I'm thinking, well, is there something better for an athlete? Right? Can we start to add some different things? Now, this is definitely trial one, and this is not going to be what we put guys through. But here I went and bought a $60 dolly from Lowe's, and I told our assistant athletic trainer, get on here and push away as hard as you can. Right? And we played around with band attachments that rip you back and allow you to basically create the same setup on the left. I always get asked, well, why don't you just use a shuttle? Because we do have a shuttle. The only issue I can see with a shuttle is that because the length of the track isn't that long, the athlete at some level might become hesitant to push off as hard as you can. I imagine, I haven't tested this, but I imagine that the takeoff velocities would be a little bit lower, right? So if we really want to worry about takeoff velocity, which is what the speed end of the spectrum is what we need, then we want to take away all the barriers to takeoff velocity, allow them to take off. Context is still king. We just talked about this. Optimal force velocity profile is ideal for ballistic performance, but doesn't mean that you can become a high flyer yet, right? It's just one angle to come at it, right? Because we always ask the question, how do we make him jump higher? Well, you can go down the rabbit hole being a strength coach. I got to make him stronger. I got to make him faster. Well, an easy one is probably to figure out what does he need right now to optimize his force velocity profile. And that alone will ideally make him jump higher. According to Jimenez-Reyes, it will make him because every single subject improved, right? The great thing about that data is that if you go into it and you look at their results, the people that had a velocity deficit got a velocity program. Their theoretical force at zero velocity, was lower. So theoretically, they got weaker but still jumped higher. That's pretty impressive, right? Because the answer isn't always make them stronger, make them stronger. Like, no, we actually potentially made you weaker, but you still jumped higher. Performance improved and you didn't have to get stronger. And in the NBA, that becomes really relevant because it's hard for us to get guys strong all the time through 82 games. Right, so as you can see, this stuff I'm really biased toward it because of my context. If ballistic performance is considered good enough, then deficit may not be an issue, right? If somebody's already good enough at jumping and you're not worried about it within the context of the game, then maybe this isn't even something you need to worry about, right? This is just another tool in the tool belt. Example, basketball player with velocity deficit may not be an issue given that a basketball court is only 94 feet. Right? Where a 100-meter sprinter, that becomes more relevant. Conclusions, force velocity profiling provides a relatively easy diagnostic tool to determine the athlete's specific force velocity deficit and allows you to create training programs around that. Moving the athlete's force velocity profile towards optimal improves ballistic performance. I love this just because it's words that I didn't even know what they meant until I looked them up. But thus, Altius is neither Citius nor Fortius, rather the balance of the two, right? So height is neither force nor velocity, but the balance of the two. Man, I just sounded smart. I like that. The push-off exercise can be beneficial, potentially even superior to some of the things we're doing. Training program specific to the force velocity profile needs improves ballistic performance. You can do this with sprinting too. So if you're working with sprinters, do the same thing with sprinting, right? And that's out there. Those are those resources. I have no affiliation with this lab. San Mozino, Morin, Jimenez Reyes. Some of you might. Does anyone here have affiliations with them? One? Nice. Tell them I showed them love. But I just think it's cool. Like, to me as a practitioner, when I see researchers write towards a practitioner, when they are trying to answer our questions, as strength coaches, we can no longer sit around and say, well, the research isn't what we want. No, it's exactly what we want. We just got to go look for it. We got to apply it, right? We got to stop making excuses. We got to start asking the questions with force plates and getting down to what our athletes actually need. So let's take the guessing out of it. I know I was a little long-winded. The setup took a little bit, but I appreciate you guys for listening and coming down the weight room in my environment a little bit. So thank you.
Questions?
All right, well, there's a lot of detail to that. So what's your typical, like, your time? What's the time frame, like you said, to get guys through taking that force velocity profile?
Yeah, we've only done it on a couple guys so far. So I couldn't tell you what a whole team, like you couldn't do it like CMJs, right? You can't just run guys through here. The biggest thing is as long as they have pulling in their training programs and they're used to jumping with loads, and this is something we started to introduce towards the end of the season for our exit screening. Guys started jumping with loads toward the end of the season. Some people were looking at me like I'm crazy, right? And I just say, well, calm down. If he could play tonight and he's going to dunk on someone, he probably can do that. But also, if we want to tailor their training programs, we got to be a little bit better about the data, so we got to prepare them. So you're going to have probably 15 minutes, I would say. And that's the same amount of time we allot for our isometric belt squat. It's 15 minutes. In practice, the way we do it is as guys roll in, I just station somebody at the plates, and they just, like, literally, they walk in. I'm like, you ain't seeing me right now. If you're coming in for 40 minutes, you got 15 minutes with Anthony, rock out. Once he's done with them, now I just got to change my program, obviously. So 15 minutes or so compared to a CMJ, which literally takes 30 seconds. Like, literally, guys roll in from, like, we have one guy who literally runs into the coaches' meetings, and before he runs in, he stops and jumps and gives us all three and and walks right in. So, yeah, I'd say 15 minutes if you want to be thorough and give optimal recovery times. Now you can start to get into the game of, well, do I program stuff in between? I wouldn't. I would just chill out with them and take it and make sure the data's there, because you don't have to do this that often, right? Every 8 weeks at most, if you really want to see. And once it's optimized, well, now maybe even 12 weeks later, just recheck it. Let's make sure it's still there.
So, like application maybe like the G League, or like, so in my setting in professional baseball,
yeah,
we have these resources actually at our lowest levels because we have it in a facility where players are we have the most players there. It's the most consistent environment for them.
Yep.
But it's also what you got the youngest players, those 16, 17, 18-year-olds. Is this high leverage enough, in your opinion, to where you would do it with some of the younger athletes at that age that are still professionals, or is there some kind of derivative that you would go off of that might be more practical in a setting like that with younger, more developmental type players?
Yeah, good question. And I probably can't answer it well because I don't work with youth athletes. I probably wouldn't be loading trap bars up to close to 100% body weight and ask them to jump, because they probably haven't done that. If you have a Smith machine, that becomes a nice option. And like I said, as long as you can get 2 trials separated by enough to where your R values are up, then that's probably going to be good enough. So maybe start at body weight and just go 2 with a Smith machine. But someone else might have a better answer for that one.
Appreciate it.
Yeah. No.
Ramsey, what's your thoughts around force velocity profiling with a squat jump style versus a counter movement?
Oh, good question. Really good question. And this becomes just talking shop at this point. But I'm biased toward a squat jump because we can set the push-off distance, right? We can set everything so there's no variation. But the counter to that is CMJ, coefficient of variances, are pretty low, so you could be pretty confident that that's not changing, right? I think that answers that. So the problem with CMJs is just that the depth you get to might change each time. And so if you load it and the depth changes, well, now your push-off distance changed, now the work changed, now the potential for height changed, and now you just confounded it a little bit. But if I didn't want to do this and I wanted to be on the other end, I would just say, well, CVs are pretty damn tight, and you could test that within your own CMJs, and Dave talked about that, and Daniel talked about that. So if your CV is really good, I would probably run a new CV on loaded jumps, and as long as that's pretty tight, then I imagine it's pretty good.
I think partly you could argue that like the squat jump is a strength biased movement anyway for some guys who are like might be a little bit more elastic.
Yep.
And so I played around with the idea and in the past have done force velocity profiling in a squat jump style and then in a counter movement jump with a counter movement.
Yep.
And in some guys you see like a different profile in the two different movements.
Yeah.
So I was just wondering like if you play around.
Yeah, no, I haven't done that. And that brings up a good point too, that you can even do it with sprinting and one of the jump variations, and there might be value even within that, right? Because as the thing changes, it's just going to give you more insight to that athlete. So if you do have time to, maybe you do one with jumping and sprinting, and now what that's going to tell, if their deficits change, it might just tell you more information about training. For example, if you're not force deficit when you jump, but you are force deficit when you sprint and you do the force velocity profiling, what that might mean is the transfer of training just isn't there. You have the force potential here, but for some reason when I got to go here, I don't have it. So now my training has to change. Maybe I need more horizontal type force movements just to transfer it. So yeah, I haven't played around with it. There's value for sure. And yeah, it probably is biased toward a bunch of things, including someone who just has a stronger base. So yeah.
How long does it usually take you guys to become familiar with this protocol? And how do you look?
I'm biased, but like it doesn't take long for guys to learn how to jump with weights. So not long at all. I mean, we thought that it would take a while, and we thought that loading them up to body weight might be super complicated. But like I said, we started to introduce loaded jumps, and guys were dominating it. And a lot of it's buy-in, right? Like if an NBA player wants to be good at something, he's probably going to be pretty good at it. So yeah, I mean, it didn't take too long, but it's probably going to be, again, context specific and the population you're working with.
Were you sneaking in during the training sessions?
I wouldn't sneak in the diagnostic stuff. Like I wouldn't sneak this whole thing in. Yeah, oh, for sure. For sure. As they come into training, I sneak everything into training. That's my only option. I don't have too many days, so yeah, for sure. Familiarize them, and then at some point just ask for 15 minutes, and as long as you, right now we're just talking strength and conditioning, put it in the right place and all that stuff, you should be fine. And as long as the blocks are, that's the other thing, like the catching weight is tough, but if the blocks are there, you're not catching anything, right? You jump and it lands, like it hits the boxes for you, so that's a much safer way than Drew did it, but they said Drew signed waivers, so we were good. Cool.
Going back to the beginning, you were saying how you use counter movement before games.
Huh?
Just wanted to know how does that inform your decision? Is that something you're doing at the moment, or are you looking at just, obviously, of course, you're compiling this information, but I think that's different that you're getting.
Yeah, good question, for sure. Kind of like Dave talked about or hinted at, the first thing I don't do is just jump to some crazy conclusion and worry about it, because the reality is they're doing it at 7 before 7:30. So there's not much I can do. Now, if someone is low and they're jumping earlier, like if you're not the last guy running into the coaches meeting, then we might pull you in the weight room and try to do something for you. And it might just be like some shuttle jumps. Like, is it just a neuromuscular thing? Do we just got to wake you up? Do you need caffeine? Like, we can try to attack some of those things acutely. But I actually don't overreact until like 3 days probably of data, right? Like, after like the second game, Anthony comes to me, he's like, hey, just a heads up, so-and-so is down. Cool, and it's in the back of the mind. The third time he comes to me like, yo, no, it's actually down. All right, cool, let's have a conversation now. And now it's the same thing that Dave kind of talked about, right? Who do we need to talk to about that? We have a full staff of trainers and PTs and nutrition, and so that just becomes like, all right, now let's take this to the greater table and have that discussion. But usually starts with the athlete too, and athletes, I mean, you guys know, they're pretty good at telling you like, yeah, I just haven't been sleeping for the past 5 days, or that road trip got me. That's when we'll see it too sometimes, right? Towards the back end of a road trip, everybody's just down a little bit, and we don't do anything. The plane just lands in Sacramento, they sleep a day, and oh, look, everyone's back now. I know I'm running on time, so.
Very corrective.
Yeah. Cool, well, thank you guys, I appreciate it.